in order to sort of, as I said, today's session is a, for me, get to know you, and for you, get to know me kind of session, so that you find out what I am planning and we're going to deal with throughout this week. So I'll just, in the second half, revisit the kinds of technical tools that we're going to work with in this particular week, and also talk as one concept about the output idea, because that's one of the concepts that is very essential, that's key to this whole idea. Now, when it comes, and again, you don't have to take pictures, it's okay if you do, but this is an online presentation which I'll send to you so you can look at the whole presentation once we're finished with the whole. My students always come and say, where is the presentation? I said, listen, it's not finished yet. Next week we're going to talk about some other points, and when it's finished, then you get the link to the presentation, because otherwise they won't come to class. So we can't have that. Okay? So just as a final wrap-up, to identify the kinds of things that we're going to look at in the course of this week. And then you get a first piece of homework to prepare for tomorrow. One important aspect is, and that's something to keep in mind, and you'll just get a reading text that reiterates this, so we don't have to go through that in detail, but it's for your own reference, is the point that obviously there is a long tradition and a long history of using technology in language learning. However, initially it was a very limited kind of exploitation. In the very early days, using these kinds of technologies was referred to as computer-assisted language learning. And it was really at a time when computers, personal computers, were something exotic. Okay? So, in the early 2000s, a colleague from Britain, Stephen Bax, said, all these attempts of trying to force technology into the language classroom doesn't work, because it's too much hassle, it doesn't work, it doesn't really fit the language classroom, and it's not normal. And it's also not normal, he said, and we talked about authenticity and real world. It's also not normal because these technologies are not normal in everyday life. If you think about the fact when the internet became common domain, when smartphones became common, that's very recent. Before that, computers were limited in exploitation, okay? And Stephen Beck said, okay, now and only when technology is normal in everyday social practice will they also find their way into teaching and learning, particularly language teaching and learning. And when you said real world relevance, when you use technology and when you invite learners to, for example, create a poster, then it's normal because they do that, kids, all the time. What do you do when you work on Facebook or Instagram or other social platform? You create something, you share opinions, pictures, you create a little digital poster.
Yeah, we are content makers.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's normal practice in everyday life. So you can also do this in the language classroom, because when I ask as a teacher learners to create something, then it's perfectly all right and it's natural because they do that in the real world. And this is where homework comes in. Homework part 1. As I said, today is our get to know, vice versa kind of session. Okay. Tomorrow, I want to put this again into practical terms, into something that you could do in a language classroom. So what I would like you to do in preparation for tomorrow is think about something that you might want to share on a social platform to briefly introduce yourself. Each of you individually. Okay? Because what we're going to do tomorrow is the following.
So on the thing, you are to create?
Well, I'm explaining. Homework needs to be explained. What we're going to do tomorrow, you notice your names, hopefully, I mean, I just copied and pasted them from my list. I hope you find your name somewhere there. Okay? You don't do this now, and that will be done tomorrow. But tomorrow we're going to work with this particular tool, which is designed for classroom, but it simulates in a way what social platforms do, where you log on like Facebook or whatever, where you say, okay, I want to share something, a video, a picture, a text, a message, or whatever. Okay? And then tomorrow you will actually do this, and it can be done with smartphones. You can take a picture of yourself, you can write a little comment, you can do a video, you can do a sound, whatever, okay? Because what you will do tomorrow is, for example, if I go for sample student, okay, I can, whoops, sorry, I need to go back. Okay. Let's hope this works.
Hi, welcome to first grade. We are your penguin reporters. I'm Vivian. I'm Olivia. We are here today in first grade class to investigate this new tool all the cool kids are buzzing about. This tool is called Seesaw. It lets kids save their work in many ways. Into different elements so that teachers and parents can see students work in no time at all. Come on, let's talk with some kids to find out how it works. Hi, Hallie. We want to learn how to sign in to Seesaw.
Okay, we stop there. I think the idea is clear. Kids, even first grade primary school kids, log on to that, and then you can do what you often do when you work in a social platform. You record your little video and you post it. You do a picture and you post it. You have a picture somewhere that you might want to post. You have a little text that you write or you have prepared. You have a message, etc. And that's integrated into a platform that the whole class can then share and see. But it's limited to the class. So you don't have to go on Facebook and have the whole world participate. You've got a sort of limited kind of space, and in that space we can all browse and take a look. And the teacher, as you will see tomorrow, has the option of reviewing and either blocking or accepting a contribution, okay? Which is sometimes important when we talk about media literacy, in order to get kids to appreciate what is appropriate and what is maybe not appropriate in a classroom. So what we're going to do tomorrow, not primary school level, this is also suitable for adults, of course. What we're going to do tomorrow, we're going to get you involved in sharing yourself, information, whatever, opinions and so on about yourself in Seesaw, so that I can find out a bit more about you. Again, talk about technology. First of all, it's fun, it's creative. You can do more than just saying, hello, my name is Bernd Rüschhöfff, I'm Westphalian. I did learn Russian, but forget it. And I studied in Münster and then whatever, which is boring, and it takes a lot of class time. We can then just look at this and take a look at it, and it's there. and it stays there. Task-oriented, output-oriented, action-oriented, product-oriented. Okay? So that's homework. So think what you might want to do in terms of simply, maybe you have a picture somewhere which is on your smartphone that you want to share and you want to write something. You can online record sound, so you can have a picture and then you can say something accompanying the picture, for example. Or you can do a video or have a text. There is a sort of a text file where you can write notes, etc. So the kinds of things that you do on a normal, quote-unquote, social networking platform. Okay? So think about what you might be willing to share with us as a class and with me as the teacher about yourself. So I get to know you, and you get to know the ones you don't know yet, or maybe get to know them better if you know them. Okay? So that's homework for tomorrow in preparation. And as I said, it's it's very easy, because either using a QR code or a text code, you log on and then you find your name and then you go there and you can post your messages, and then we have it in this space and share it. Okay? So that's preparation for tomorrow. That's again a tool which can be used very nicely in a classroom. For example, we talked before the break about the pet idea. For example, sharing information. You talked about the video that you might want to do about your pets. So those of you who have a pet, if this were a language classroom, why don't you prepare a profile of your pet and present it in English and share it, and everybody can see it, and we can walk virtually around the gallery. So it's an alternative to the kind of traditional gallery walk where you prepare physical posters and we all walk around the classroom, which is perfect, but every now and then it might be nice to do it this way. Okay? So this is like a digital gallery walk and a digital kind of space for learners to share and produce and do something that they do in the real world. So the authenticity is there, the output orientation, etc. So that's the first tool that we're going to work with tomorrow. Okay? And as I said, in preparation, if you would be kind enough to actually prepare this. Whoops, sorry, there is something wrong here. No. What happened? Interesting. I have to start again. Sometimes technology, I'm just going to talk about the fact that technology is so dead easy to use, etc., etc. But it seems to be that sometimes
they're not predictable.
They're not predictable. This is artificial intelligence, you know. And now it refuses to come up again. Luck of the draw. Okay. So let's just see. There we are. Okay, I was just going to say, in addition to the fact that they've become normal, and as I said, I'll send you the Stephen Beck's text about normalization. It's normal, so what is normal in the real world should be and is accepted practice in the classroom. It's also dead easy, because the technical skills that are needed now to work on these collaborative tasks are not really a challenge any longer. And the computer started playing up on me at that moment in time. But as you saw from the seesaw, pardon the pun, example, it is easy. And I wanted to share with you part of the primary school video, because it shows even kids, they consider it totally normal to work with this, and quite easy. How do I log on? QR code. Yeah, that's okay. I know what a QR code is. And it works. Okay? So, the technical challenge is not in there. And also, when you have a tool that makes life easier and makes solving a problem or handling a task more easily with less challenge in the sort of, not the language learning, but in the general sense, then of course the learners can really concentrate on the task. If the challenge is not how am I going to actually technically manage to present what I'm going to present, you think more about the technical side than about the task. You know for tomorrow, keeping my fingers crossed that technology is not playing up on us, that the technology is not the problem. How you want to share something, what you want to say or not to say or whatever. That's the challenge, so you can concentrate on the task, okay? And that goes for all the technology that we will look at in this class, and that I suggest has a place in the language classroom, okay? We have, of course, normalization, a digital generation. You're all what people call the digital natives. I'm an immigrant, a digital immigrant. I sort of migrated into the world of technology. You were born into it, okay? But I can claim... Pardon?
We are native speakers.
You are native speakers. I'm using an accent. I'm using a digital accent, sort of, to speak. Even though I can claim I started very early. I mean, my beginnings in computer-assisted language learning were in 1981. That's when I built my first computer. Because in those days you couldn't buy a PC or a laptop. The very first ones you had to put together yourself. It was a Sinclair ZX81. It had 1K memory. 1K. Okay. I don't even have to explain what 1K means. 10 years ago I would have had to say 1K means so many text, very little text. Okay, that was the very first beginnings, and then we started playing around. But we were a dedicated few, and people always said, yeah, that's fine, it is nice, but it's not really normal in the classroom. That's different. And I always like to share a nice little video which in a way reflects this. You notice here that all the things, or a number of things that we talked about when we did our little brainstorming at the beginning, are here because digital tools do afford authenticity. When you share tomorrow your personal profiles, it's authentic because it's something that you might do on some social platform with friends or whatever, okay? And it's obviously better and easier to do that on Seesaw than on Facebook. There are people who actually use Facebook for classrooms, but it's always a bit of a challenge. Privacy, etc., is an issue, so maybe this is a better option. Output orientation, you produce something, you share something. Task orientation, that's the real activity that you do. Competencies, etc., cooperative learning, and so on, terms we're going to talk about are all in there because it's often best done in a cooperative fashion, because here, for example, you see something someone else did, and that might give you an idea to add something to your own profile, because the topic or an issue that was mentioned, and so on, so it evolves. And it's immersive learning. You really immerse into the learning, and you don't really think about the language as such, as intensively, because I'm not asking you, make sure that you use simple subject, predicate, object statements, starting with a personal pronoun, preferably I. Okay, nope, that's not the idea. The idea is whatever you want to say is what you want to say. What I always share in this context is a little video which is a couple of years old, but it still serves the purpose, because this shows how normalization is actually practiced. If some of you were at the conference last year or in the workshop last year that I did for an afternoon, you might have seen this video, but it's revisiting. Doesn't happen. Basically what happens here, this is an advert. Advertisements, by the way, are fantastic for learning because they add what we haven't talked about yet. At some point we will, intercultural awareness, okay, because advertising and advertisements, they really focus on particular cultural context and try to sell something in a way that fits a particular cultural context. This is an advertisement out of a series of advertisements that were created by British Telecom for their super fast BT whatever network, internet access. And what people in Britain have always liked is advertising that tells a story, rather than just saying, this is the product, it's fantastic, buy. Okay, so a different kind of approach. And what they did here, they had a whole series of little sitcoms, because the Brits also like sitcoms, funny little stories. And these were the so-called BT flatmates. They were students living together and they needed fast internet access. And this video in particular shows nicely how networking and collaborative work and having easy access to all sorts of things, like the things that we've already looked at, sort of makes life easier and helps. I hope the sound is okay, but the basic story is that one of them is online dating, trying to sort of, you know, get a date through whatever platform, and the other two flatmates help him indirectly by working collaboratively on the same project, getting this guy a date. So let's see how the sound works.
Online dating again?
It's 2013, Grandma, isn't it? He's really one in. She thinks I'm funny, but she's not sure about my photo.
Yeah, it's a bit fun, Dad. Quick, swap it for this one before she bails.
Just keep her smiling.
Not the cheese dude.
How do I feel about electrophobia? Fear of chickens is rare, but she means the band, mate. Tell her you got tickets to see them on Friday. Have I? You do now? Got a date?
8 times faster fibre optic broadband. Infinity, only from BT.
Okay, so that's the natural things that people do with technology, so why not do similar things with technology in the language classroom, which is, and it shows normalization, okay? All of them working on the same project via the same platform, logging on to whatever platform this guy is using to get a date, etc., and helping him along, choosing the picture. We won't go as far tomorrow with our seesaw, but in a way. Now, what kind of tools are we going to look at throughout this week? A variety. We've already talked about online resources, social media, the networking tools that we worked with, like Mentimeter earlier today, etc. Obviously, at some point, we're going to talk about mobile learning, because when it comes to the practice part, the exercise part, there are mobile learning apps that actually allow you to also then sometimes focus on something like learning, practicing vocabulary, grammatical rules, etc. But with a difference. You don't just have platforms where you can download or access grammar exercises, but you also, as a teacher, have tools that allow you to create little activities. For example, all of us at some point have used or are using flashcards when practicing. There are apps available, again, like the Mentimeter, that teachers or you yourself as a learner can use to create, as an ongoing process, flashcards or similar kinds of things, and then you can work with them. So, what we often suggest to our teachers, why don't you invite the learners, again, consolidating, Ergebnissicherung, why don't you encourage the learners to sort of compile whatever they learn in terms of grammatical structures or vocabulary using one of these apps, one of these tools, Padlet or something like that. Kahoot is one which is useful, and we're going to talk about them. And then they sort of maintain this. In the past, teachers used to ask learners, keep a vocabulary book and write down all the words that we learned this week. Very difficult to learn with. Kahoot, electronic, anytime on the bus, preparing for the exam. You've got them on your smartphone, you've got them on your computer, you've got them everywhere. So this mobile learning area is one that we're going to address, including, as I said, the social media, etc. This is an older presentation. I would now put Seesaw there, no longer Facebook, because Seesaw at the time didn't exist, but things develop, okay. Obviously, we're going to look at the creative part, as already mentioned. The movies, the comics is one that I haven't mentioned yet, but we're going to create, you're going to, not me, workshop. You do the work, I go shopping. You create little comics. Pictochart, we talked about the poster, including the augmented reality, creating, for example, QR codes and linking them with sources of information. So if you don't have a QR code creator, you might want to, I mean, you've got a apparently QR code reader anywhere on your smartphones, but also try to sort of download, preferably it's easier to do on your laptops or something, a QR code generator. Okay, there are lots of them, and they all work quite nicely. And you can then create a QR code that you can embed in posters, for example, when we come to that. Okay. One point where I'm not sure yet how we're going to deal with that, because it's always a bit of a challenge. It depends on whether we have the time. The gamification of learning, that's a very big issue at the moment, trying to find game-like activities in the classroom. I've got one example from a German context that, if time permits, we'll look at, which is a platform that you can use as a teacher to create an adventure game, almost like a fantasy game. The difference is that you create challenges, so you're the knight in shining armor and you're trying to get to the treasure or save the princess or whatever, okay? And in order to get strength points or get weakness points or strength deducted, like these games are organized, you have to deal with language challenges. So if you appropriately get across the request to cross a river, you get strength points because you use the appropriate language. If you don't communicate effectively, you get weakness points, so the strength goes down. It's a controversial thing. We'll look at it and I'll see what you have to say if we have the time. But it's interesting as a concept because it's something that kids like, playing adventure games, etc. And you, at least as a teacher, can create a game like the flashcards thing that might motivate, as we said at the outside, and be more versatile and bring a bit more diversity to the classroom. We'll see. One aspect is this one here, cognitive tools. Because these are tools that learners and teachers can use in order to actually get learners to think about language and structure and vocabulary in a slightly different way than simply learning words out of context, and really appreciate a strategy that they need in the real world, i.e. thinking about context and deducting meaning from context, etc. We'll deal with that as well. And then we'll deal with something that teachers love, a little tool called LingoFox. And what LingoFox actually does is it's a magic tool that allows you to create worksheets out of texts of your own. So if you use an authentic text, you can actually work with these texts in the language classroom. Okay? In order to sort of exemplify this, because this is a sort of slightly more challenging concept, I've got it already here. Okay. So, here we go. Okay. Now, this is the tool that you're going to work with, and that's why I said earlier on at the outset of class what you might want to do: bring your laptops tomorrow, because this is the kind of software that I would have to copy onto your laptops. But then you've got it on your laptop, and you've got a 4 weeks period to work with the software, and you can keep working in a sort of demonstration mode. But if you really want to use that, which is a very nice thing now, it's a team of teachers that developed this, and they don't want payment for this. They say, if you donate money to some sort of charity, and it doesn't have to be a lot, a little bit of money, and just send them proof that you donated something to some child care, whatever charity, you get a free license, which I think is nice. And it's a tool that teachers like, as you will see in a minute, because again, like we did at the outset, imagine a situation where you want to, where you want to work with a text in the classroom due to current discussion, topical, something to do with Brexit, which is obviously on everybody's minds in Britain at least, but also in other contexts. And you want to work with this particular text in a language classroom because you like doing topical things in your classroom. You obviously use such a text taken out of the internet, and you print it, you edit it, and give it to your learners. And then you work with this text. The traditional approach would be, okay, you read the text, you do listening comprehension, etc., reading comprehension, and so on. And then afterwards, you notice, in the sense of our Willis cycle at the end, there are still some grammatical challenges or some vocabulary problems, or you want to make sure that learners totally understood the texts, etc. And the challenge is, where do I get the exercises? Textbook texts come in a package. You have the text, and then you've got exercises that are created on the basis of these texts. But obviously, a text that was created a long time ago is not topical, might not be motivating for the learners. Here, you use a new, up-to-date, current topic, today's Guardian, etc. And then you want to work on some grammatical point or on some language. What do you have to do? Normally, you have to go back to the textbook and use the exercise that focus on the linguistic vocabulary or whatever issue in the textbook, which is totally removed from the text you've just worked with. Okay? Now comes my magic wand. My middle name is David Copperfield. Okay? Right. First thing this thing does, in addition to simply allowing you to do a word processing thing, it allows you to analyze this text linguistically. So you have a little fox, as you will see in a minute, who runs through this text. Clever little fox, sniffing out all the grammar, all the vocabulary, all the word classes, etc. in the text, and says, wow, I've got the text analyzed. Okay? And now, imagine you notice in your class that the learners still need to work on verbs. Okay? David Copperfield. You say, okay, let's do a little gap-filling type of activity. Let's focus on verbs, and I just do everything. Verbs, auxiliaries, and so on. And I want to create a gap-filling activity which has the base verb behind the gap. Here we are. And now I have a gap-filling activity, which is exactly the kind of worksheet that you would find in a normal workbook. But it uses the text that you've been working with, that you've selected, topical, authentic, today, motivating, and you practice whatever language challenge is to be practiced on the basis of this particular text. And there is a whole range of activities which you will experience yourselves, because as I said, we'll install that on your computer and then you can play with this. If you want to do a lot of classroom preparation, you can use the next 4 weeks to create activities. And then at a pressing of a button, you get all kinds of worksheets out of this. Okay? And you can play around with this, because you might say, okay, that's a rather form-focused kind of activity. I would also like to do something that sort of maybe is a sort of more general kind of idea in terms of finding out whether the learners have actually understood the text and can handle the text. I presume you know this principle of close test or C-test, where you just take every X word out of the text and learners have to guess the word in the text from the context, which is what some people call the so-called shotgun approach to finding out whether learners have understood the text. Because if learners have understood the text, they will appreciate from the context of the gap what is missing there. Okay? And these kinds of activities are possible as well. You can also do the so-called C-test variety, which you might know, because it's a sort of certified and accepted test principle as far as text comprehension is concerned. C-test is basically, if I go back to the text, C-test is a particular kind of approach to this sort of close test, where you notice that, for example, the words, depending on how long they are, give you a certain number of letters, and then you have to guess or think about the rest. And that's an accepted comprehension test. So if you want to do a comprehension test in your class and want to see whether learners can understand a text at a particular level, you can use this test and see how they get on with it. And then, depending on how many gaps they can fill, you can more or less identify their level of comprehension. Okay? So there is a whole variety, and I'm not going to go through all of these now, because this is for you to discover. A whole variety of things that you can do with this particular activity. One final one to share, because it's one that people react to differently when they see this first. They've got a nice one here which is called intentionally distort the text. What you get here is you get a version of the text that looks like your printer is just about to run out of ink. And the first reaction that a lot of people have is a natural one. What the hell is this? Why would I want to use this particular text or print version of a text in a language classroom? Any reactions?
It's really difficult to recognize.
But any reactions?
Yeah, it's a real challenge.
It's a challenge, yes. So it's a task. Sometimes the newspaper comes in a slightly smudgy. No, but the point is, what do you have to do in order to actually understand and come to grips with the text when you read it for the first time?
Construct each word.
Yeah, you really have to. It's a very good invitation, let's call it that, to the learner at close reading. Sometimes you simply say, okay, scan the text for the most important information, reading for gist, etc. Okay, or focused reading. Okay, here you are talking about close reading. You want the learners to read the text really closely. Every word matters, the whole text as such. And some people suggest that this particular kind of initiative trains learners' reading comprehension skills in terms of close reading. Because in order to read that text, you have to know a bit about the background. You know it's about Theresa May, she's the Prime Minister of Britain, nobody knows how long that's going to last, etc. Brexit, that the government is apparently doing something, there are ministers involved, and there are problems, and there's Downing Street in there, and it's very distorted. So you have to really activate all your faculties, all your world knowledge, and all your linguistic knowledge in order to read your way into the text, which is one of the strategies that we try to get learners to become aware of, that sometimes close reading is important. And close reading works and comprehension works best if you use all your faculties and if you draw on information that you have, that you might think as an untrained reader not necessary and relevant, but here you learn, aha, if I draw on some of these knowledges I have, then I can understand the text. Okay? That is for you to appreciate and to learn when you get access to this particular kind of, okay, and then you can save it and print it out, etc., etc., which I don't actually want to do at the moment. But this is one of the tools the portfolio, so to speak, of tools that we're going to work with and look at in the course of the next week. Okay? Right. As far as my lesson plan for today is concerned, I have a second piece of homework is the wrong term. A bit of reading for you to browse through whenever you have the time. I hope I have enough copies. I asked them to make enough copies for each and every one of you, because we had one of the big words when we looked at our, or when we compiled our understanding of language teaching, the idea of authenticity. And authenticity is a very big word in language teaching and language learning, and that's what we want to sort of decode and deconstruct tomorrow, what authenticity actually means. Authenticity, for example, as you will maybe appreciate from the text, but also from your previous knowledge, is something that I will ask you to do in real terms tomorrow, i.e. share information in some sort of simulated classroom-based social classroom platform, for example. That's authenticity. But there are other aspects that are part of authenticity, and that's what we're going to discuss about in a theoretical level. What I'm trying to do throughout the week is try to find a balance between doing real things, concrete things, possibly things that have to do with the content, with some language acquisition theoretical or methodological principle, but then do it in practical terms, like the Mentimeter, for example, or when you create a poster on a particular issue. I might not ask you to create a poster on Nizhny Novgorod, but a poster on a particular language acquisition theory or learning approach, for example. Okay. In that area, can I just ask, when you discussed language acquisition theories and language learning principles, did you take a closer look at Piaget and Vygotsky's social-cultural method or approaches, let's call it that?
Yes, of course, especially on Vygotsky.
Okay, so that's good, because at one point I will give you a little text that deals with Piaget and Vygotsky, and then you have to create a poster trying to exemplify their work, and they disappear. It's okay, no problem. And you will create a little poster, for example, a product, your understanding of what this is all about, because sometimes our students face the problem that they are not quite sure as to where the differences and similarities are between Vygotsky's and Piaget's idea, etc., etc. So whenever we learn something in theoretical terms, we always try to combine that with using one of these tools. So what we're doing will be a bit unnatural, because as I said at the outset, often it is good to do something in a traditional blackboard, whiteboard driven fashion, and then at some point balance it next time around with a digital option. But as we are trying to condense into a one-week seminar the use and the options that technology make available, we're going to do it all the time. But that's part of the deal, because otherwise we would have to have a whole kind of term with weekly sessions, etc., which might be a bit of a challenge. Okay, so the theoretical part we're going to look at tomorrow, again also using at some authenticity, will be the at some part of language learning methodology and principle will be a focus on output and authenticity. That's sort of an important aspect. So, as far as introductions and as far as getting a first feel for what we're planning to do. That was sort of my input, my spiel, and our interactions. The question for me now is, first of all, is this in line with the kinds of expectations and things that you need? Or is there something missing? Or is there something that's totally irrelevant where you would say, don't need? So this is the moment in time to share this. And I mean that seriously. Not in a serious negative fashion, in an honest fashion, because, I mean, it was a bit difficult for me to think about what I might want to do this week, because I didn't know, obviously, anything about your background. I sort of started from thinking, okay, these are future teachers of language, and they've done their initial training and are now working in the MA track. So what do our students possibly need in such a class, and try to translate that, mediate that, as I said in the outset, into contexts here, but I might have gotten it totally wrong. So tell me if there's anything that you are either missing or anything where you say, okay, that's something we don't need because we've done that already and we don't need to deal with that in class.
I have a question. All these programs, they are really good for people who are highly motivated for the learning language.
Mm-hmm.
But in your opinion, what should you do with the people, with person who don't want to learn,
mm-hmm.
and you give them that exercises to make, for example, with this fox or
mm-hmm.
whatever it was.
Yeah, lingo fox. It's called.
What should the teacher do with the students who are not interested in learning, but they have to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And you are teaching with this exercise.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, any comments from the floor? It's a very good question and a very important one.
May I say?
Yeah.
I think that it's up to a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be an interesting person, and if you are
Yeah.
interested enough,
Yeah, but
it doesn't matter what applications you use, what sources.
yeah, that's part of the package. But I mean, obviously, I mean, we all have classes where you have a teacher whom you like or you don't like, and that has an impact on your motivation. But this is more serious in a way, because there are learners who are not interested, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the challenge is, what do you do with these?
We don't need to do anything at all. There are some students who don't want to do it, and we can leave them. So
Yeah.
a student who wants, he will always find motivation and time for this.
Yeah.
And actually, language is not for everyone.
Okay. So what I read out of your comment is, what doesn't work is force feeding. I.e., you don't want to learn, it's good for you, young lady, so you better learn. And you stay here until you finish reading this text. I'm using you. I'm good one, my students know that. I'm good ones for using people as as dialogues, as sort of partners in crime, okay? But that's an approach that doesn't work. I mean, if you simply insist, okay, my answer or my experience also is that what we said at the beginning, if we, for example, as an alternative to some traditional option that has been predominant in the language classroom, use, and I'm just using this now as a hypothetical, sort of metaphorical example, use a different kind of tack. Maybe learners who initially thought, English, not interested, say, oh, fun, Mentimeter, and all of a sudden they are in the mode. So it may well be that the diversification and the versatility that technology makes possible in the language classroom might all of a sudden reach learners that might, in a more traditional setting, be less motivated. There might be the sort of IT-focused kid who all of a sudden, in a team when you have to create something, do a poster, has IT skills that are perfect in that team, and through this experience becoming a sort of valid team member and doing something, might say, oh, and it might help. You said, for example, there are learners who might not necessarily not want to learn, but who are not interested and willing and not socially minded in terms of becoming an active participant in a classroom. If you find a way where this person can do something, but doesn't have to step out in front of the public, so to speak, maybe it gradually helps this person to join. Because a learner who's always silent is not necessarily a learner who doesn't want to learn, but is a challenge. And simply saying, okay, now John is not talking anyway, so I never ask him, is maybe not the solution, but saying, okay, there are sort of less face-threatening options. So that's my general answer. So the fact that technology might offer a different tack, a different approach to learners who might not normally tack in is maybe one of the advantages of technology. And when you look at these tools, when you have to choose one, for example, and think about how that could be worked and used in a language classroom, then that might be one of the guiding principles and something to think about. On practical terms, because as I said earlier at the outset, we have this action research principle, okay? Which means we cooperate a lot with schools. And we cooperate with schools and do this intentionally that are not just the cream, sort of the top grammar school, perfect kids from an affluent neighborhood where everything is nice and shining. We deliberately work with schools in challenged areas, okay? That's why a lot of our classes, the ones we work with, are very multi-ethnical and multilingual. So there are lots of migrant background students in there, okay? Which we do deliberately because, first of all, a lot of our students have a migrant background and they study, for example, languages and want to become teachers because they say, when I was at school, I had a teacher who didn't care and know anything about how to deal with a person like me. Because, okay, I have a migrant background and somehow this person didn't really care. But, okay, maybe I can do something better when I'm a teacher, okay? And sometimes there are exactly these kind of challenges. I've got two examples. One, there is a school in our region which is in a part of Duisburg which is almost exclusively Turkish. So 90-something% of the kids are from a Turkish background. And these kids simply say, a lot of them, not all of them of course, simply say, why should I learn English? I know German, I know Turkish, I don't need English because their environment is dominated by by German and Turkish. We did a project with that school where they said, okay, we need to find something to get these learners to appreciate that it's worth learning English. And we did that by introducing all the teachers there to a number of options that first of all allowed learners to become playfully, creatively involved in doing something, and all of a sudden they said, oh. And we did something in addition to that we haven't talked about yet, but I mentioned the Common European Framework of Reference and the online interaction. We embedded that in activities that were online connected. So we had a partner class in another part of Germany. Not even, we had one in Australia as well, but not just in a sort of native speaker context, but where they worked on more or less the same curricular issues, and we said, why don't you exchange your challenges and your learning with these people? Or why don't you ask the people in Australia what they think about something? And all of a sudden they noticed, oh, English is something I can use in the real world. Okay? And that was due to some of the technological tools that we use. So sometimes, I'm not saying it works all the time, but sometimes it may well be that when we use and integrate these digital tools in the classroom, we might reach learners where other opportunities might not reach the learners. Second example, another school in Essen, what we in German call Gesamtschule. And Gesamtschule are the kinds of schools which are sort of comprehensive schools, which is where sort of, I mean, if we talk about Essen, there's one part of Essen which is the affluent, the rich kids part, Bredeney. So parents from Bredeney don't necessarily send their kids to a Gesamtschule. They send them to some gymnasium, some grammar school, okay? So there's one Gesamtschule which is not too far away from university, and that was exactly the challenge. The teacher said, these kids don't want to write in English. It's okay to have them in class, but okay, I can just get them to participate, but they don't really want to write. What we did there, we did a wiki writing project. So using something like Wikipedia exists again like the seesaw in a small format, wiki spaces that you can create for your class, and you invite learners to write something in a wiki, like a Wikipedia entry. And that works collaboratively. They could do it from home, but also at school. They could work together like a wiki works. And we said, okay, we're going to publish this openly on the web and we'll see what happens. Obviously, again, me being the manipulator, I got some of my students to actually read this and post comments. Like it happens on Wikipedia or whatever. People post comments and say, oh, I like that. Interesting statement, etc. So they did actually get some others as well, which was very nice, because once things start to get communicated on the web, it sort of apparently seems to sort of attract other comments. But I obviously used a little bit of a trick there and asked my students, trainee teachers, I said, why don't you write little comments? And through this experience that they wrote something in English and it was noticed, not by the teacher, but it was out there and people read that. Wow, I've written something, and people actually read that and they comment. The bubble burst, so to speak. They all of a sudden started to write and their writing improved. The teacher sort of followed that. First of all, they were more willing to write, and the writing skills improved, because then they started to care about the text, because they said, oh, somebody is reading this, I better make sure that I get this right. And they started using online dictionaries to find nicer words, as they said, because they wanted a nice word, etc. That's the second answer. So again, in a nutshell, technological tools, digital tools offer opportunities. Whether they're all accepted by the learners is another matter, but at least, I think, at least we've got more options. That would be my answer to that question. Anything else where you might say, okay, maybe we don't need that in the week, we might want to focus on something else, or any kind of constructive criticism is perfect.
I think that everything was great, and I've learned a lot.
Well, we're only at the beginning of this week.
Sources.
We have to have more. It means, truly, it means working together, okay? As I said, I mean, I'll invite you to actually do things with these tools, not just register them, but actually work with them, and make choices at some point. When we talk about all these apps that are available, there is a nice website put together by the Council of Europe called ICT Inventory, where you've got all these apps collected into a sort of database, and you can look at them, and then you can choose from them, and at one point you'll get homework in terms of looking at them and selecting one where you would say, that looks like a very interesting one, so that's all part of your deal as well. So it's going to be a collaborative work win-win situation. And as I said, it's not going to be the workshop situation where I leave all the work to you and I go off and do some shopping. It's going to be collaborative in the sense. In terms of language teaching, language learning methodologies, or language teaching, language learning, language acquisition really, theories, is there anything where you might want a bit more additional information or background, as for example when we talked or found out today that maybe something about Willis's framework for task-based learning is something that you might still be interested in, or is that ground covered by your introductory and initial seminars? The question embeds you've dealt with sort of the regular diet of language acquisition theories, from behaviorism to sort of more current interactionist and social cultural theories.
Well, may I say something?
Yeah.
I think that well, everything is just great, but the truth is that unfortunately our schools and even in our universities we often don't have any appropriate equipment.
That's not just
to apply such sources.
Yeah. But that's not that's a challenge in German context, for example, as well. I mean, what we've just set up in our department is a digital tools learning lab, which is a room like this, and it's basically a cupboard with laptops in the corner, 3 interactive whiteboards around the room so that people can learn how to use interactive whiteboards and all sorts of other stuff, and then just movable tables, sort of triangular, pie-shaped, so that you can arrange furniture whichever way you want to do. You can put them in rows like here, you can put them in a horseshoe, you can put them into islands, etc. What we've done, why we've done that is first of all for our students, but also for teachers to come in and do workshops with us, because a lot of schools still lack the equipment. That's a challenge. But that's why, for example, I think something like this here, the Mentimeter we started with, is doable, because kids are often better equipped than the schools. They've got smartphones, they've got tablets, etc. And just using smartphones, you can already do, as we saw earlier, a lot of things in a flexible way, and so bypass. Unless the school authorities say no smartphones in the classroom. And it happens. We did a project at a school, again in our region, where the learners had to use the smartphones because they were supposed to use online dictionaries for a particular activity. And for every lesson, not just for the whole project, for every lesson, we had to get permission from the headmaster to allow kids to use their smartphones. How stupid is that? But we had to get official permission, simply because the rule is smartphones at that school, no go. Okay? Now, the reason why I asked about the language acquisition theories, I mean, depending on our time frame, what I could chip in at some point is maybe do a short lecture on sort of the kinds of language acquisition theories that are floating about and that people are discussing. And as I said, I don't want to carry planes to Nizhny Novgorod, but maybe if there is something, then I can sort of provide some feedback there as well. Okay. As far as the task-based activity is concerned, I've got a little text that I can share with you, and I've got Jane Willis's framework, which basically explained everything. Okay. I don't know how flexibility is in this country, but if we've achieved the plan, the 5-year plan for this particular class, as far as the first of the 5 years, days is concerned, then it may be permitted to say, okay, now rather than drag on and look at yet another tool, because that would be just why not use it at the time when it's needed. I could do the typical sage on the stage, instruction teachers, class dismissed, as in military terms. If that's permissional and I'm not going to get reprimanded from the authorities here, you never know, then I would say thanks for your cooperation, your willingness to cooperate. One final question, or rather request, because it might be easier, because I don't know what kind of list they have here. What you could do is you could send me an email. So I've got your email contact, because when I want to use some of these things, I can pre-register you with your email. You still, I mean, I'm not selling these emails and using it for any improper purposes, don't worry. But what you could do is send me an email, and my email address, returning to the sort of traditional medium here, and luckily I was given non-permanent writing material. And you just have to write class Nino or something. Don't write any messages. I mean, you can if you want to, but it's not necessary. Simply that I can register your email. So my email address is basically my name. It doesn't matter whether it's in capital or in small letters. Okay, I hope that is readable. As I'm just using the, it's okay. So it's Bernd, first name Bernd dot Rüschhoff, Rueschhoff, my last name, at, and then uni for university, minus DUE, D-U-E, Duisburg-Essen.de, as it happens to be in Germany. Okay, so just send me an email just saying, hi, I'm in your class. And then I know, and I can put you into a contact folder, which I can then use to sort of make easy access to some of these tools. Okay, that would be my final request. As I said, think for tomorrow about some product you might want to share, picture with video enhanced or audio, etc. You can create that tomorrow. You can also prepare some pictures, doesn't matter, because you can upload or you can do them immediately. And we'll do that as a starter tomorrow to work with the seesaw, and then we'll talk about a few other ideas how seesaw can be used in a language classroom with a real language learning, language teaching focus, and then we'll take it to the authenticity discussion, and then we move on to the tools that make teaching and preparation of materials easier in terms of LinguFox and cognitive tools. That's the first sort of focus topic. Okay, thanks. I'll see you tomorrow. Class dismissed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Right.